Recognizing the fire of anger. Have you ever felt your body heat up when anger takes over? Your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your face flushes, and suddenly it feels as if a fire is raging inside you. That's not just a metaphor. Ancient Buddhist teachers often compared anger to fire, and they weren't exaggerating. Anger burns. But here's the thing, it burns you first, long before it touches anyone else. There's a story from a Zen master I love to share. One day, a young disciple came to him, furious at another monk in the monastery. The disciple wanted justice, maybe even revenge. He ranted and raved, and finally asked the master, "What should I do? How can I stop being so angry at him?" The master looked calmly into the young man's eyes and said, "Anger is like holding a burning coal in your hand. You intend to throw it at someone, but in the meantime, you are the one getting burned." That image always stops me in my tracks. Because it's true, isn't it? When you're angry, you feel consumed. Your heart races, your mind spins, your words sharpen. And long after the argument is over, you're often the one left trembling, replaying the moment again and again. Anger rarely gives us the satisfaction it promises. It just leaves us exhausted, wounded, and sometimes ashamed. Think about it. How many nights have you lost sleep, not because of what someone did, but because you couldn't let go of the storm inside? How many relationships have been strained, not from the original problem, but from the explosion of words that followed? If you're honest with yourself, you might see that the real suffering wasn't out there. It was happening within your own heart. Buddhism teaches that anger is one of the most destructive states of mind. It clouds our clarity, blinds our wisdom, and poisons our ability to love. And yet, we all know that anger can feel so powerful, so justified, almost like fuel. In the moment, it feels like strength. But if we look closer, we realize it's a strength that betrays us. Because the more we feed it, the more we weaken our own peace. Imagine anger as a fire in a dry forest. The more wood you throw in, the bigger it grows, and the more dangerous it becomes. When you replay the insult in your head, when you rehearse comebacks, when you cling to the story of how wronged you were, that's all more wood on the fire. Before long, it's no longer just about what happened. The fire spreads. And if we are not careful, it consumes our joy, our relationships, even our health. Now, I want to pause and ask you, when was the last time anger burned you more than it hurt the other person? Maybe it was in traffic, when someone cut you off and you carried that frustration for hours. Maybe it was at work, when a colleague dismissed your idea, and you couldn't stop replaying it all day. Or maybe it was at home, with the people closest to you, the ones we often hurt most when anger takes control. The hard truth is this. Anger punishes us first. We think it's a weapon aimed outward, but really, it's a poison we swallow ourselves. No wonder the Buddha called anger one of the 3 great poisons of the mind, along with greed and ignorance. It's toxic, not because it makes us bad people, but because it robs us of the very peace and clarity we long for. But here's the good news. The moment we can recognize anger for what it is, a fire, a burning coal, a storm, we take the first step toward freedom. Recognition is powerful. Think of it like this. If you're caught in a storm but you don't realize it, you get soaked, blown around, completely lost. But if you know you're in a storm, you can seek shelter. You can wait it out. You don't have to mistake the storm for who you are. That's the invitation here, to see anger not as your identity, not as your truth, but as a temporary fire moving through your mind. And the moment you can say, "This is anger. It's burning. It's hurting me," something shifts. You stop fueling it. You create the possibility of cooling it down. I'll be honest with you, this isn't easy. I've struggled with anger myself. I've had moments where I thought, I'm right to feel this way. I deserve to be angry. And maybe I did. But being right never protected me from the consequences of staying in that fire. The truth is, no matter how justified I felt, the anger still drained me. It still made me say words I regretted, still left me with a heavy heart. Over time, I began to see that the real strength wasn't in holding on to anger, but in learning how to let it go. So, if you take away just one thing today, let it be this. Anger is not your friend. It may feel like power in the moment, but it's a fire that scorches the hand that holds it. And the simple act of recognizing it, just naming it, can be the beginning of peace. The Zen master was right. You don't have to keep clutching the burning coal. You don't have to keep feeding the fire. And once you truly see that anger is hurting you more than anyone else, you'll find the motivation to look for another way. And that brings us to the next question, the one I'd love for you to sit with until our next part. If anger is fire, then what is water? How do we cool this burning inside us? What practices, what wisdom, can help us turn this destructive energy into something healing? That's exactly what we'll explore in the next chapter. How to pause, breathe, and take the first step toward calming the storm of anger. Pausing to stop feeding anger. Have you ever noticed how quickly anger can take over? One moment you're calm, and the next, something small happens, a word, a gesture, and suddenly your whole body reacts. Your voice rises, your hands tighten, and your mind is ready to fight back. And in those fiery seconds, one rash word or action can change everything. That's why I want you to hold on to this thought. Just one breath can save you from a lifetime mistake. There's a story about a father that illustrates this so well. He had just come home from a long day of work, tired and already irritable. His young child accidentally spilled juice all over the living room floor. The father felt the surge of anger immediately rising. He was about to shout, his voice was already forming the words, when something inside him reminded him to pause. Instead of yelling, he took one deep breath. Then another. He stayed silent for a few moments, and in that pause, he felt the fire of anger cool just enough to stop himself. Later that night, he thought about what might have happened if he had exploded. He might have said something cruel that his child would remember for years. But because he paused, because he breathed, he avoided planting that painful memory in his child's heart. Isn't it incredible that something as simple as a single breath can change the entire course of a moment? Buddhism teaches that mindfulness begins with awareness. Anger is like a fast-moving train. It wants to pull you along before you even realize you've boarded. But mindfulness is the ability to see the train coming and decide not to jump on. That pause, that breath, is the space where freedom lives. Let me ask you, how many times have you regretted something you said in anger? How many times have you wished you could rewind, take back the words, undo the damage? And yet, the truth is, once spoken, words can't be erased. They can heal over time, but they often leave scars. If just one breath could save you from those scars, wouldn't it be worth practicing? When I think about my own life, I can remember moments where I didn't pause, and I still feel the sting of regret. Words I can't take back. Faces of people I love, hurt by my sharp tone. And on the other side, I can also remember the rare times I did pause, when I held my tongue, when I chose silence over reaction. Those moments gave me peace. They gave me clarity. And they reminded me that it's never weakness to hold back, it's wisdom. There's a common misconception that pausing makes you look weak, like you're backing down. But the truth is, it takes far more strength to pause than to lash out. Anyone can yell, slam a door, or send an angry text. But to stop, breathe, and hold that energy without releasing it destructively, that's mastery. That's real power. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." But sometimes, the best word is no word at all. Silence, chosen mindfully, can be the most compassionate response. It's like pouring cool water on the fire before it spreads. So how do we practice this pause in real life? It begins with training ourselves in small moments. The next time you feel irritation rising, even something small, like someone cutting you off in traffic, notice it. Take one slow breath. Don't act yet. Feel the air enter your lungs. Let it go slowly. That one breath interrupts the automatic reaction. And in that tiny space, you have a choice. Over time, these small practices build a habit. You start to trust yourself. You know you can catch the anger before it explodes. And eventually, that pause becomes second nature. I'd like to invite you to reflect for a moment. Imagine the last argument you had with someone close to you. Now imagine if, right at the peak of your anger, you had taken 3 mindful breaths before speaking. How might that conversation have gone differently? How might your relationship feel now if you had paused? This is the transformative power of stopping. Not stopping forever, not ignoring the problem, not pretending everything is fine, but simply pausing long enough so that your words and actions come from clarity, not fire. There's a beautiful image in Zen. When a pond is stirred, the water becomes muddy, and you can't see the bottom. But if you let it sit still, the mud settles and the water clears. Our minds are just like that. When anger stirs them up, everything feels cloudy, distorted. But if we pause and breathe, the mud settles. Suddenly, we can see clearly again. And here's something important. Pausing is not just for the benefit of the other person. It's a gift to yourself. That father in the story, he didn't just protect his child. He protected his own heart from regret. He gave himself the peace of knowing he chose love over anger. So today, remember this: you always have a choice. Anger may rise like a wave, but you don't have to let it crash over your life. You can breathe. You can stop. And in that single breath, you can change not just the moment, but the future. Because every time you pause instead of reacting, you are rewiring your mind. You're teaching yourself a new way of being, one rooted in peace, compassion, and strength. So let's carry this practice with us. The next time you feel anger rising, don't fight it, don't judge it, just stop. Breathe. Be still for a moment. Trust that this pause is not in vain. It is the first step, the doorway to transforming anger into peace. And this brings us to our next question. Once we've paused, once we've stopped ourselves from adding fuel to the fire, what comes next? How do we move from stillness into true understanding? That's exactly what we'll explore in the next part, looking deeply into the roots of our anger. Looking deeply into the roots of anger. Have you ever wondered why anger feels so powerful, so immediate, yet it never truly comes out of nowhere? Here's something important to remember. Anger never arises on its own. There is always a seed behind it. Think about it. When you're angry at someone, is it really just about what they did in that one moment? Or could it be that the moment touched something deeper? An old wound, a hidden fear, a memory you'd rather forget? There's a story I once heard about a man who often found himself exploding at his wife and children over the smallest things: a misplaced object, a noisy room, a casual comment. One day, during a meditation retreat, he finally sat long enough with his anger to see where it was coming from. And what he discovered surprised him. His fury wasn't really about his family at all. It was about his childhood, when he had been criticized and belittled by his own parents. The harsh words of his loved ones in the present were like echoes of those old wounds. His anger was a shield, protecting the frightened child that still lived inside him. That's the thing about anger. It often hides pain. It covers fear. It masks insecurity. On the surface, it looks like fire, but underneath, there's usually something much softer, more vulnerable. The Buddha taught that if we look deeply into our anger, we'll almost always find suffering. Sometimes it's fear of rejection. Sometimes it's disappointment. Sometimes it's the ache of not being seen, or the hurt of not feeling valued. When we only react to the surface, we miss the truth. But when we pause and look deeper, we discover that our anger isn't just about them, it's about us. Let me ask you, when was the last time you got really angry? If you look back honestly, what was really driving it? Was it the traffic jam itself, or the fear of being late, of looking unprofessional, of not being respected? Was it your partner forgetting something, or was it the pain of feeling unimportant to them? Was it your child's misbehavior, or your fear that you were failing as a parent? When we look closely, we see that anger is rarely the root problem. It's a signal, a red flag telling us something deeper needs attention. I remember one time in my own life when I was furious at a friend who had cancelled plans at the last minute. On the surface, I told myself I was angry at the inconvenience. But when I looked deeper, I realized my anger came from something else entirely. I felt abandoned, unwanted, like I wasn't important enough. And beneath that was an old wound of loneliness. The anger was real, but it wasn't the whole truth. The deeper truth was hurt. This realization changes everything. Because when you see anger as just the outer layer, you stop fighting it head on. Instead, you gently ask, what pain is this anger protecting? What fear is it hiding? This is the practice of looking deeply, or what Buddhists call insight meditation. It's not about judging yourself. It's not about pushing anger away. It's about being curious, compassionate, and brave enough to face what's underneath. Imagine your anger as a weed in the garden. If you just cut the surface leaves, it will grow back. But if you gently dig into the soil, you find the root. And only by tending to that root, whether it's fear, sadness, or misunderstanding, can you truly transform the weed into something else. Here's the liberating part. Once you see the root, anger begins to lose its power. If you realize, oh, I'm not actually furious at my colleague, I'm just afraid I'm not good enough, suddenly, your response shifts. You don't need to attack them anymore. Instead, you can care for the fear inside you. So next time you feel anger rising, try asking yourself, what's really going on here? What am I afraid of? What old hurt might this moment be touching? You may be surprised at the answers. Now, I know this isn't easy. Looking deeply requires courage. Sometimes the roots go back years, even decades. Sometimes we find things we didn't want to face, like unresolved grief or long-forgotten shame. But here's the gift. Once you see clearly, healing becomes possible. Because clarity is the first step toward compassion, for yourself and for others. Think again about that man from the retreat. Once he realized his anger toward his family was actually old pain from his childhood, something softened. He no longer saw his wife and kids as enemies. Instead, he began to care for the wounded child inside himself. And as he did, his relationships grew gentler, warmer. The anger still came sometimes, but now he knew its root. And because he knew the root, he no longer felt controlled by it. This is the magic of insight. When you truly see the cause, you no longer feel enslaved by the symptom. So, the teaching here is simple yet profound. Anger never arises by itself. It always carries a hidden seed, a wound, a fear, an unmet need. And when we take the time to look deeply, we stop wanting to throw our anger at others. Because we see, with compassion, that what really needs healing is within. And here's the question I want to leave with you today. Once we've discovered the roots of our anger, how do we transform them into peace? How do we not just understand the pain, but actually heal it? That's where we are headed next, into the practice of compassion, the gentle water that cools the fire of anger and brings true freedom. Nurturing compassion to cool anger. Have you ever wondered, can you be angry at someone and still feel compassion for them at the same time? It almost sounds impossible, doesn't it? Because when we are angry, all we see is the wrong they've done. All we feel is the heat of being hurt. But here's the truth. Compassion is the cool water that can extinguish even the fiercest fire of anger. There's an old teaching from the Buddha that illustrates this beautifully. He once told his students, when someone causes you pain, don't just look at their actions. Look deeper. See that they, too, are suffering. Why? Because suffering is often the reason people act unkindly. A harsh word usually comes from a heart that's hurting. A cruel action often hides a deep wound. Let me share a simple story. A young monk once asked his teacher why people are so quick to anger. The teacher pointed to a man who was shouting at his neighbor. He said, "Do you see his anger? Beneath it, there's fear. Maybe he fears not being respected. Maybe he fears losing control. That fear is painful. And when pain overflows, it often spills out as anger toward others." When we see this, that anger in others often comes from their suffering, something shifts inside us. Instead of only reacting with our own anger, we begin to feel compassion. It's like realizing that the person throwing fire at you is, in fact, burning inside. Think about it. Have you ever snapped at someone you love, not because they deserved it, but because you were exhausted, stressed, or hurting from something else? Maybe you lashed out at your partner after a long day at work. Or raised your voice at your child when, deep down, you were just overwhelmed. If you've done this, then you know, anger is often a symptom of suffering. Now, imagine flipping that perspective. The next time someone directs anger at you, instead of only defending yourself, ask, what pain might they be carrying? What wound might be driving this behavior? That doesn't mean you excuse harmful actions, but it does mean you begin to understand. And understanding is the seed of compassion. Here's a practical image I like. Picture your anger as a blazing fire. If you add more fire, more shouting, more resentment, it only grows stronger. But if you pour cool water on it, through compassion, through understanding, the flames begin to fade. Compassion doesn't deny anger. It transforms it. I once heard a touching story about a woman who always clashed with her father. He was critical, distant, and often angry. For years, she carried resentment. But then, one day, she learned about his childhood, how he grew up in poverty, neglected, and ridiculed. Suddenly, her perspective changed. His harshness wasn't just cruelty, it was his way of surviving his own pain. Did that excuse everything? No. But it softened her heart. And with that compassion, her anger lost its grip on her. This is the essence of the teaching. When compassion arises, anger no longer has space to thrive. The two cannot fully coexist. If your heart is filled with the desire to understand and care, the fire of anger begins to wither. But here's a question for you to reflect on. When you're in the middle of being angry, How easy is it to remember compassion? Not very, right? In those heated moments, compassion feels far away. Which is why compassion isn't just something we summon in crisis. It's something we nurture every day, like watering a plant, so that when anger does arise, compassion is already strong enough to meet it. One way to do this is through a simple practice. When you feel anger toward someone, pause and silently say to yourself, "This person, like me, also suffers. This person, like me, wants to be happy." It might feel strange at first, even forced. But over time, these words soften the heart. They remind us that beneath all the mistakes, all the harmful actions, there is still a human being who longs for peace, just as we do. And I'll tell you, the more you practice this, the more freeing it becomes. Because anger traps us. It makes us believe we are victims of someone else's actions. But compassion gives us agency. It gives us the power to choose a different response, to step out of the cycle of blame and into the space of healing. Let me ask you this. Think about the last person you were angry at. What do you imagine they were going through? What burden might they have been carrying that day? And if you could see their suffering clearly, how would that change the way you felt? That's the miracle of compassion. It changes the story. It doesn't erase the pain, but it gives us a new lens. And through that lens, anger loses its fuel. So, the message is simple yet profound. When compassion rises, anger falls. They cannot share the same ground. If you want to cool the fire of your anger, water it daily with understanding, with empathy, with compassion. But let's be honest. Sometimes, the anger we feel is overwhelming. Sometimes, compassion feels too far away, too hard to reach. So what do we do then? How can we take care of ourselves when the fire feels too strong to put out? That's what we'll explore next, the practices we can use to heal ourselves when anger feels unbearable. Embracing anger with mindfulness. Let me ask you something. When anger rises in you, what's your first instinct? For most of us, it's to either push it down and pretend it's not there, or to let it explode, hoping that somehow releasing it will make us feel better. But what if there's another way? One that's gentler, wiser, and actually healing. Here's the hook. Don't reject your anger. Embrace it, the way you would hold a crying child. I remember hearing a teaching that completely changed the way I look at anger. A Zen master once said, "When you're angry, don't fight with it, and don't run away from it. Instead, cradle it, like a mother holding her baby." Imagine that for a moment. Picture a baby crying uncontrollably. If the mother shouts at the baby to stop crying, what happens? The baby only cries louder. If she ignores the baby, the suffering deepens. But if she gently picks the baby up, holds it close, and whispers with love, the baby begins to calm down. Our anger is the same. It doesn't need to be fought. It doesn't need to be suppressed. It needs to be seen, acknowledged, and gently embraced. Now, I know this might sound abstract. How do you actually embrace anger? Here's one simple practice. The next time you feel your anger rising, pause. Don't try to fix anything. Don't rush to speak or act. Instead, breathe. With every in-breath, silently say to yourself, "Hello, my anger. I know you're here." With every out-breath, say, "I am here with you." It may feel unusual, even awkward, but what you're doing is powerful. You're bringing mindfulness to your anger. You're not letting it control you, but you're not abandoning it either. You're acknowledging it with awareness and care. Let me share a personal story. A friend of mine used to struggle with road rage. Every little mistake from another driver would make his blood boil. He tried everything, blasting music, ignoring it, even yelling inside his car. Nothing worked. One day, he decided to try something new. The moment he felt his anger rising, he placed his hand gently on his chest and took 3 mindful breaths. Instead of saying, "That driver is an idiot," he whispered to himself, "Hello, anger. I see you." He told me it was strange at first, but something softened inside him. He realized his anger wasn't really about the other driver. It was his own stress, his own exhaustion from a long week. By holding his anger with care, like holding a crying child, he found peace. This is the essence of the teaching. Mindfulness transforms anger into understanding. Anger is not our enemy. It's a messenger. When we embrace it with awareness, it begins to tell us what's really wrong. Maybe it's our unspoken fear. Maybe it's our hidden sadness. Maybe it's simply exhaustion. And when we see clearly, anger loses its power to dominate us. Here's a question for you. What would happen if, the next time you felt anger, you treated it not as an enemy, but as a wounded friend asking for your attention? Think about it. Anger doesn't come out of nowhere. It always has roots. And like any root, it needs care to heal. Mindfulness is that care. It's the gentle embrace that allows the storm inside us to settle. Let me be honest with you, it's not easy. The instinct to push anger away or explode it out is strong. But every time we practice embracing it, even for just one breath, we are training ourselves to respond differently. We are building a new habit, the habit of kindness toward ourselves. And here's the beautiful paradox. When we stop rejecting our anger, it actually begins to dissolve. When we stop feeding it with judgment or fear, it slowly melts away, like ice turning into water. What remains is clarity, calm, and sometimes even compassion. I often think of it this way. Anger is like a storm cloud in the sky of our mind. We can't blow it away by force. But if we give it space, if we allow it to be there and gently observe it with mindfulness, eventually, the cloud passes and the blue sky returns. So, the message here is simple but profound. Don't fight your anger, don't ignore it, embrace it. Hold it tenderly with mindfulness, the way you'd hold a crying child. Because only then can anger soften into understanding. Now, here's the next step. Once the storm has settled, once anger has been held and soothed, how do we carry that calm into our daily lives? How do we make sure peace isn't just something we feel in meditation, but something that stays with us as we navigate work, family, and all the challenges of modern living? That's the question we'll explore next. How to sustain peace in the middle of everyday life. Practicing loving speech and deep listening. Have you ever noticed how powerful words can be? One sentence, spoken in anger, can shatter trust that took years to build. And yet, a single heartfelt word, spoken with love, can heal wounds that seemed impossible to mend. Here's the hook. A word can destroy a relationship, but it can also save a life. I once heard a story of two friends who had been inseparable since childhood. They grew up together, shared everything, and trusted each other like brothers. But one day, a misunderstanding led to harsh words. Pride got in the way. Silence grew. What was once a deep friendship turned into distance and coldness. For months, they avoided each other. Until one evening, one of them decided to reach out. Instead of defending himself or blaming the other, he said simply, "I miss you. Can we talk?" That conversation wasn't easy. There were tears, pauses, even awkward silences. But slowly, through honest words and deep listening, their friendship was reborn. Not the same as before, maybe deeper, because it had been tested. This story reminds me of a truth we often forget. Communication is not just about talking, it's about connecting. And when anger gets in the way, the only bridge that can reconnect us is loving speech and deep listening. Now, let's pause here. Think of a moment in your own life when someone truly listened to you, not to argue, not to fix, but just to be there and hear your heart. How did that feel? Most of us carry a deep longing to be understood. And when someone offers us that gift, it's like water to dry soil. The Buddhist teaching calls this deep listening. It means listening with the intention not to reply, but to understand. And paired with loving speech, words that are gentle, honest, and free of blame, this practice becomes one of the most powerful tools to transform anger. Imagine this. You're angry with someone close to you. Every part of you wants to lash out, to prove you're right. But instead, you breathe. You pause. And when you speak, you choose words that come not from your fire, but from your heart. Words like, "When you said that, I felt hurt." Or, "I really want us to understand each other." These words don't add fuel to the fire. They invite healing. It's not easy. I'll be the first to admit that. In fact, it can feel almost impossible in the heat of the moment. But that's why it's called practice. Each time we choose gentleness over harshness, we are training ourselves to respond with wisdom instead of impulse. Let me share something personal. Years ago, I had a falling out with a family member. We both said things we regretted, and for months, there was silence. My anger told me to wait until they apologized. But then I remembered this teaching of loving speech. So one evening, I picked up the phone and simply said, "I know we've both been hurt. I don't want this distance between us. Can we talk?" That one sentence cracked open a door. It didn't fix everything overnight, but it allowed healing to begin. And that's the point. Loving speech and deep listening don't magically erase anger. but they create the conditions for understanding to grow. And when understanding grows, anger naturally fades. Here's a question for you. Who in your life right now might be waiting for your words of reconciliation? What would happen if, instead of waiting for them to change, you took the first step with loving speech? I'll tell you this: anger isolates. It builds walls. But communication, real, mindful communication, tears those walls down. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about whether we value the relationship enough to rebuild it. Of course, this leads to a very real question. What if the other person doesn't change? What if they keep hurting us, no matter how lovingly we speak? That's a question worth exploring. But before we go there, let's hold on to this truth. When we listen deeply and speak with love, we give peace a chance. So the takeaway is simple. Anger wants to divide, but loving speech and deep listening can transform it into connection. The next time anger rises in your relationships, try this. Pause, breathe, and instead of striking back, choose one gentle word. You might be surprised at how much healing one word can begin. In the next part, we'll face the harder truth. What do we do when the person who hurts us continues to do so, even after we've tried everything? Letting go of expectations and control. Have you ever noticed this strange paradox? The more we want someone to change, the more stuck we become in our own anger. Here's the hook. The harder we try to make others bend to our will, the more we trap ourselves in frustration. Let me tell you a story. There was a woman who had been married for over 10 years. She loved her husband, but there was one thing that always made her angry: his forgetfulness. He would forget anniversaries, forget to take out the trash, sometimes even forget conversations they had the day before. She reminded him, scolded him, even begged him to change. And every time he forgot again, her anger grew. One day, after yet another disappointment, she sat alone in the living room, her heart heavy with frustration. And then something clicked. She asked herself, am I angry at him, or am I angry because he won't fit into the version of him I created in my head? That moment was a revelation. She realized her suffering wasn't just about his forgetfulness, it was about her attachment to the idea of how he should be. When she loosened her grip on those expectations, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Her husband didn't magically change, but her relationship with her own anger did. Now, let's pause here. Doesn't this sound familiar? Maybe you've been frustrated with a colleague who never does things the way you think they should, or a friend who doesn't show up in the way you expect, or even your children who don't follow the path you imagined for them. How much of our anger, really, comes from life not meeting the script we secretly wrote in our heads? This is the uncomfortable truth. Anger often grows from the soil of I want. I want you to behave this way. I want things to unfold according to my plan. And when reality doesn't cooperate, we suffer. But here's the liberating teaching. Letting go of control is not losing, it's choosing freedom. When we release the grip of constant expectation, we stop fighting battles we were never meant to win. Because let's face it, we cannot control another person's nature. We cannot dictate the weather of life. What we can control is the way we meet what comes. Think of it like this. Imagine you're holding onto a rope, pulling against someone else who's tugging in the opposite direction. The harder you pull, the more your hands burn. But the moment you let go, the pain stops. The struggle ends, not because you won, but because you no longer need the fight. That's what letting go of expectation feels like. It's not weakness. It's wisdom. I remember a time in my own life when I was caught in this trap. There was someone close to me I desperately wanted to change. I thought, if only they'd do things differently, everything would be fine. But years of waiting, pushing, and hoping only left me drained. The day I finally accepted, this is who they are. I cannot mold them into who I want them to be. Something shifted. I felt lighter. And paradoxically, when I stopped trying to change them, our relationship became more authentic, more peaceful. Here's a question for you. Who in your life are you silently trying to reshape? What would it feel like to release that burden, not to give up on them, but to free yourself from the prison of control? Sometimes we confuse letting go with defeat. But it's not surrendering to hopelessness. It's surrendering to reality, which is the only place peace lives. By letting go, you're not saying, I don't care. You're saying, I choose peace over constant struggle. I choose love over control. And this doesn't just apply to relationships. It applies to life itself. How many times do we get angry because life didn't follow our plan? The job we didn't get. The opportunity that slipped away. The unexpected illness. The cancelled trip. If we measure peace by how well life obeys our commands, we'll be disappointed over and over. But if we practice acceptance, not passive resignation, but active openness, we discover a freedom no circumstance can take away. Here's the core message. Letting go is not about losing. It's about choosing peace. It's about saying, I will not let my expectations chain me to anger anymore. So next time you feel your frustration rise because someone isn't acting the way you want, try this. Pause, breathe, and whisper to yourself, I don't need to control this. I can choose peace instead. And that brings us to the next question, one we all struggle with. Even if I learn to let go, how do I keep my peace in a world full of chaos and adversity? That's what we'll explore in the next part. Seeing impermanence to lighten the heart. Let me ask you something. The anger you're feeling right now, will it still matter a year from today? That's the hook. And it's a question worth sitting with. Because so often, when we are caught in anger, it feels like the world is on fire. But if we look back on our lives, how many of those moments of rage still hold power over us? Most of them fade, like storms that seemed endless while they raged, yet left only a clear sky behind. There's a story of a young monk who once asked his teacher, Master, how can I deal with my anger? It feels so heavy, so unshakable. The teacher simply pointed to a flower in bloom and said, Do you see this flower? In a few days, it will wither. The same is true for your anger. It seems solid now, but it too will pass. Can you see that? That's the essence of impermanence. Everything, joy, pain, success, failure, even our anger, arises and fades. Nothing stays fixed forever. And when we really take this to heart, something inside us softens. Because if it won't last, why should we cling to it? Why should we burn ourselves on something that is already slipping away? Think about it. How many times have you been furious with someone, only to laugh about it years later? Maybe you argued with a sibling over something trivial, or held a grudge against a colleague for weeks. And then, time passed. The sting faded. You may not even remember what started the fight. That's impermanence at work. When we are in the grip of anger, it feels permanent. It convinces us, this will never change. I will always feel this way. But impermanence reminds us that nothing, not even this intensity, lasts forever. And when we remember that, it creates just enough space to breathe, to loosen our grip. I've experienced this myself. There was a time when someone betrayed my trust. The anger I carried felt like a heavy stone lodged in my chest. I thought, this is it. I will never get past this. But months later, when I looked back, I noticed the sharpness had dulled. The wound was healing, slowly, quietly, without me forcing it. That realization, that time itself softens even the hardest emotions, was a gift. Here's a question for you. The thing you're angry about right now, will it still matter 5 years from now? 10 years? Or will it become another story, another memory, another lesson? Impermanence doesn't mean we deny our feelings. It means we see them for what they are, passing weather, not permanent identity. A thunderstorm may be violent, but it never lasts forever. And just like the sky is never harmed by the storm, our true self is never destroyed by anger. When we practice seeing impermanence, anger loses its fuel. It has nothing to cling to. We can let it rise, let it move through us, and let it dissolve, without building a prison around it. But here's something important. Impermanence doesn't just help us release anger, it also teaches us to cherish the moments of peace, love, and connection. Because those, too, are fleeting. If you know the flower will wilt tomorrow, you'll treasure its beauty more deeply today. If you know life itself is impermanent, every breath becomes precious. So the next time you feel anger flare up, try asking yourself, will this matter in a year? Or even a month? And then, notice the way the question itself begins to loosen the knot in your chest. The teaching is simple. When we truly see impermanence, anger has nowhere to root itself. It passes through us like clouds drifting across the sky. And that brings us to the next step. If impermanence can help us let go of anger in the moment, how do we cultivate a lasting peace? How do we nourish this energy of calm so it becomes the ground we walk on every day? That's the question we'll explore in the next part. Practicing gratitude to transform emotions. Let me start with this thought. You cannot feel anger and gratitude at the exact same moment. It's impossible. Try it. Think about someone you're upset with, and now, in the same breath, recall something they've done for you that you deeply appreciate. Notice how the two emotions can't really coexist. One dissolves the other. There's a story of a young man who was often frustrated with his father. He thought his father was stubborn, too strict, never understanding him. And every time they clashed, his anger flared up like fire. But one day, after a particularly heated argument, he sat alone and remembered something simple. The nights his father stayed awake when he was sick, the meals his father worked late hours to provide, the quiet sacrifices that were never spoken of. Suddenly, his anger softened. It wasn't that the disagreements disappeared, but in the light of gratitude, the sharp edge of his rage melted into something gentler, something closer to love. That's the power of gratitude. It's not about denying hurt or pretending conflicts don't exist. It's about shifting the lens. When we choose to look at what we've received instead of only what we've lost, the energy inside us transforms. Anger, which feels heavy and suffocating, is replaced by a lighter, warmer presence. Think about your own life. Has there been a time when anger was eating at you, until gratitude stepped in? Maybe you were frustrated with your partner, until you remembered the countless small ways they show up for you every day. Or maybe you were upset with your aging parent, and then one memory of childhood care came rushing back, softening your heart. Gratitude doesn't erase problems, but it changes the emotional soil in which those problems grow. Science even backs this up. Studies show that practicing gratitude, whether through journaling, prayer, or simply pausing to acknowledge what we have, lowers stress hormones, boosts happiness, and improves relationships. Gratitude literally rewires the brain, carving new pathways that make it harder for anger and resentment to take over. Here's a question worth sitting with. When you're angry, what story are you telling yourself? Usually, it's about what someone failed to do, how they hurt us, how unfair life feels. But gratitude invites a new story, about the help we've received, the love we've been shown, the fact that we are alive and breathing at all. And when the story changes, the emotion changes too. I've found this in my own life. There was a time when I felt bitter toward a friend who let me down. I kept replaying the disappointment in my mind. But when I finally sat down and asked myself, what am I grateful for in this friendship? A flood of memories came back. Late-night conversations, laughter, times they supported me when no one else did. And in that moment, the disappointment shrank. Gratitude didn't excuse the hurt, but it reminded me of the bigger picture. So here's the teaching. Gratitude is one of the strongest antidotes to anger. It doesn't mean you ignore injustice or suppress your emotions. It means you actively choose to water the seeds of appreciation, rather than the seeds of bitterness. And whatever we water, grows. The beautiful thing is, gratitude doesn't just heal us, it radiates outward. When we live in gratitude, we speak differently. We soften our tone. We extend more patience. And that ripples into our families, our communities, even the strangers we meet. Imagine a world where more people responded to anger with gratitude. Where conflicts were met, not with retaliation, but with a pause, a remembering of what binds us, of what we owe each other. That kind of world begins with one person, one practice, one moment of choosing gratitude instead of resentment. So the message is simple but powerful. Gratitude is the strongest medicine for anger. It transforms the energy inside us, turning fire into light. But here's the deeper invitation. This practice isn't only about healing ourselves. It's about contributing to something larger, bringing more peace, more compassion, more healing into the world. And that brings us to the final step of this journey. Transforming anger is not just for you, it's for everyone. How do we expand our inner peace into something that touches the lives around us? That's where we'll go next. Transforming anger into the power of compassion. Have you ever thought about this? Anger is not always the enemy. If we know how to work with it, the fire of anger can light the path instead of burning everything down. Most of the time, when anger rises, we see it only as destructive. And yes, when it's left unchecked, it can hurt relationships, damage health, even lead to violence. But in the Buddhist tradition, there's a deeper teaching. Anger itself is energy. And energy, if guided, can be transformed. Like fire, it can destroy, but it can also cook a meal, warm a house, or forge steel. There's a story about the Bodhisattvas, beings of great compassion. They don't try to kill anger with more anger. They don't fight fire with fire. Instead, they look deeply into its roots and transform it into compassion. For example, When they see injustice, they may feel the heat of anger rise. But rather than exploding in hatred, they channel that energy into courageous action, protecting the vulnerable, speaking for the voiceless, building peace instead of destruction. Their anger becomes fuel for love and action. Think about it. Many of the greatest movements for justice and peace in history were born not from cold indifference, but from a fierce, burning refusal to accept suffering. Martin Luther King Jr. felt the sting of racial injustice, but he didn't let anger consume him. Instead, he transformed that fire into a vision of love and nonviolent resistance. His compassion was not weak, it was powered by the strength of righteous anger, reshaped into a force for healing. The same is true for us, in smaller, everyday ways. Maybe you feel angry because someone mistreated you, or because the world seems unfair. That anger can eat you alive, or it can become the push you need to stand up, to set healthy boundaries, or to create change where it's needed. The question is not, do I have anger? But rather, what do I do with it? Here's a way to practice. When anger rises, pause and breathe. See it not as a monster to suppress, but as a child to guide. Ask yourself, what is this anger trying to protect? Often, it's pointing to something we deeply care about, our values, our sense of fairness, our love for others. When we touch that root, anger transforms into compassion, because at its heart, it's born from love. For example, a mother might get angry when she sees her child in danger. That anger, when guided, becomes protective love. A citizen may feel outraged at corruption or injustice. That outrage, transformed, becomes the motivation to vote, to speak out, to build community. This is the teaching. Anger, when transformed, becomes compassion in action. Instead of burning bridges, it builds them. Instead of harming, it protects. Instead of closing hearts, it opens them. But transformation doesn't happen automatically. It requires mindfulness. Without awareness, anger explodes outward or implodes inward. With awareness, we can catch it, hold it, and redirect it. It's like holding a torch. You can wave it wildly and set the house on fire, or you can use it to light the way through darkness. So next time you feel anger, don't be afraid. Don't try to bury it, and don't let it explode. Hold it gently, breathe with it, and ask, how can this energy serve love instead of hate? That's the Bodhisattva way. That's the human way. And here's the beautiful part. When you transform your anger into compassion, it doesn't just heal you, it ripples out. Your peace becomes contagious. Your compassion inspires others. And slowly, the fire that once burned in you becomes a light that warms the world. So the message is clear. Transforming anger into peace doesn't just bring happiness to you, it spreads love to countless others. And this leads us to a bigger question, one that we'll explore next. How do we plant peace, not just in moments of crisis, but in the tiny seeds of daily life? Because peace doesn't just come from big transformations, it grows from small, everyday choices.